The rain was coming down hard that Tuesday evening. Daniel pulled his jacket tighter and checked his watch for the third time. If he didn't catch the next train, he'd miss dinner with his girlfriend, and she was already upset about how much overtime he'd been working lately. The subway station was just 2 blocks away, but with this weather it might as well have been a mile. He was practically jogging when he saw her. An old woman, maybe in her 70s, standing near the grocery store entrance with bags scattered around her feet. One had tipped over, and oranges were rolling across the wet pavement. She looked confused, turning her head left and right like she'd lost something important. Daniel's first instinct was to keep moving. He had maybe 5 minutes before his train left. Someone else would help her. There were plenty of people around, but something made him stop. Maybe it was the way she kept patting her coat pockets with shaking hands, or the lost expression on her face. Whatever it was, his feet just stopped moving. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, walking over to her. "Are you okay? Do you need some help?" The woman looked up at him with watery blue eyes. Relief washed over her face. "Oh, thank goodness, I can't seem to remember where I parked my car. I know it was somewhere around here, but everything looks different now." Daniel glanced around the parking lot. It was a big one, and with the rain, visibility wasn't great. "What kind of car is it?" She paused, her brow furrowing. It's a blue one. Or maybe gray? I'm sorry, my memory isn't what it used to be. My daughter usually drives me, but She trailed off, looking even more distressed. Daniel felt his phone buzz in his pocket. Probably his girlfriend wondering where he was. He ignored it. "That's all right. Let's gather up your groceries first, and then we'll find your car. I'm sure it's here somewhere." Together, they collected the oranges and got everything back into bags. The woman introduced herself as Mrs. Dorothy Bradford. As they walked through the parking lot, checking row after row, she kept up a steady stream of conversation that sometimes made sense and sometimes didn't. "I used to come here every week with my daughter," she said. "Rebecca loved the bakery section. She'd always sneak cookies into the cart when she thought I wasn't looking." She smiled at the memory, then her face fell. But that was a long time ago. After 20 minutes of searching, Daniel had to admit defeat. They'd covered the entire lot twice. Either her car wasn't here, or she'd parked somewhere else entirely. Mrs. Bradford looked exhausted, and she was shivering despite her coat. "Mrs. Bradford," Daniel said gently, "I don't think your car is in this lot. Do you remember if you might have parked somewhere else? Or maybe someone dropped you off?" She pressed her fingers to her temples. I don't know. I thought I drove here. I always drive myself. But maybe." She looked at him with eyes that suddenly seemed very old and very tired. "I'm sorry. I'm causing you so much trouble." "You're not causing any trouble," Daniel assured her, though he'd now definitely missed his train. "How about this? Why don't I drive you home? We can figure out the car situation tomorrow in the daylight." Mrs. Bradford looked uncertain. "Oh, I couldn't possibly impose. You've already been so kind." "It's no imposition. Really. You can't stand out here in the rain." After a bit more convincing, she agreed. Daniel loaded her groceries into his car, and she gave him an address in the suburbs about 30 minutes away. As they drove, she talked more about her daughter. "Rebecca was such a spirited girl," Mrs. Bradford said, staring out the window at the rain. "Smart as a whip. She wanted to be an artist, you know. Painted the most beautiful landscapes." She sighed. "We had a terrible fight once. Said some things I didn't mean. She left, and I haven't seen her in 30 years. Daniel didn't know what to say to that. 30 years was a lifetime. "Have you tried to find her?" "Oh yes, for years and years. But it's like she disappeared. Changed her name maybe, started over somewhere new." She turned to look at Daniel. "The worst part is not knowing. Is she happy? Is she even alive? I wake up every morning wondering if today might be the day she comes back." The pain in her voice was raw, and Daniel felt a lump form in his throat. He thought about his own mother. She'd died when he was just 5 years old, and he barely remembered her. His father rarely talked about her, and over the years Daniel had stopped asking. It hurt too much to see the sadness in his dad's eyes. When they arrived at Mrs. Bradford's house, it was a small, neat place with a garden that probably looked lovely when it wasn't being pounded by rain. She insisted he come inside for tea. "Please," she said. "It's the least I can do. You've been such a gentleman. My late husband would have appreciated that." Daniel knew he should probably just head home, but something made him agree. Maybe it was the loneliness he sensed in her. Or maybe he was just curious about this woman and her lost daughter. Inside, the house was warm but cluttered in the way homes of elderly people living alone often are. Newspapers stacked on tables, magazines from months ago, photographs everywhere. Mrs. Bradford shuffled to the kitchen to make tea, and Daniel found himself drawn to the mantel above the fireplace. There were dozens of photos there. Mrs. Bradford as a young woman, a man who was probably her late husband, and many of a girl at various ages. The daughter, Rebecca. Daniel picked up one photo in particular. Rebecca as a young woman, maybe 22 or 23, with long dark hair and a bright smile. His heart stopped. The woman in the photo looked exactly like his mother. Not similar. Not kind of like her. Exactly like her. The same eyes, the same smile, even the same way she held her head slightly tilted to the right. Daniel pulled out his phone with trembling hands and found the one photo he had of his mother. It was old, scanned from a physical picture his father kept in a drawer. He held it up next to the frame. It was the same woman. "Here we are," Mrs. Bradford said, coming back with 2 cups of tea. She noticed Daniel standing frozen, staring at the photos. "That's my Rebecca. Beautiful, wasn't she?" Daniel couldn't speak. His mind was racing. This couldn't be possible. His mother's name was Jennifer. Jennifer Chen. She died in a car accident when he was 5. His father had told him that story 100 times. There was no way she was this woman's daughter. No way she was Rebecca Bradford. But the photo didn't lie. "Are you all right, dear?" Mrs. Bradford asked, concern in her voice. "You look like you've seen a ghost." Daniel realized he'd been staring for too long. He set down his tea with a shaking hand. "Mrs. Bradford, this might sound crazy, but can I show you something?" He pulled up the photo of his mother on his phone and held it out to her. Mrs. Bradford took the phone and he watched her face go pale. Her hand flew to her mouth. "Where did you get this?" she whispered. "That's my mother," Daniel said, his voice barely steady. "Her name was Jennifer Chen. She died when I was 5 years old. But that's her. I'm sure of it." Mrs. Bradford sank into her chair, still staring at the phone. Tears started rolling down her cheeks. "Rebecca," she breathed. "My Rebecca. You're her son?" The room seemed to spin. Daniel sat down before his legs could give out. This couldn't be happening. This had to be some kind of mistake. But even as he thought it, he knew it wasn't. The resemblance was too perfect. The timing could work. "Everything could work. I don't understand," Daniel said. "My father told me my mother's name was Jennifer. He never mentioned the name Rebecca. Never mentioned you." Mrs. Bradford was crying openly now, but she was also smiling through her tears. She changed her name. She must have changed her name. "Oh my God, all these years..." She looked at Daniel like she was seeing him for the first time. "You have her eyes. And your chin. That's from my husband's side of the family." Daniel felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. If this was true, if his mother really was this woman's daughter, then his father had been lying to him his entire life. But why? What reason could he possibly have? "I need to know everything," Daniel said. "Tell me about Rebecca. Tell me about my mother." And as Mrs. Bradford began to talk, Daniel realized his simple act of kindness had just changed his life forever. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat in his apartment staring at the ceiling, replaying everything Mrs. Bradford had told him. According to her, Rebecca had been a bright, creative young woman who'd fallen in love with a man Mrs. Bradford hadn't approved of. A man named Thomas Chen, Daniel's father. The story Mrs. Bradford told was complicated. She admitted she'd been strict with Rebecca, maybe too strict. When Rebecca turned 22 and brought Thomas home to meet her parents, Mrs. Bradford had immediately disliked him. She thought he was too old for Rebecca, too secretive, too controlling. She'd told Rebecca she was making a mistake. The fight had been explosive. Rebecca had accused her mother of never letting her make her own choices, of trying to control every aspect of her life. Mrs. Bradford had said terrible things in return, things she'd regretted the moment they left her mouth. She told Rebecca that if she left with that man, she shouldn't bother coming back. The next morning, Rebecca was gone. She'd packed a bag in the middle of the night and disappeared. Mrs. Bradford had tried to find her, filed missing person reports, hired a private investigator with the little money she had. But Rebecca had vanished completely. No trace, no trail, nothing. Now, sitting in his apartment at 3 in the morning, Daniel couldn't stop thinking about one question. Why had his father kept all of this secret? When the sun finally came up, Daniel called in sick to work. He needed answers, and he needed them today. He drove to his father's house, a small 2-bedroom place on the east side of town where his dad had lived alone since Daniel moved out 6 years ago. Thomas Chen answered the door in his bathrobe, surprised to see his son so early. "Daniel, what's wrong? Are you sick?" "We need to talk," Daniel said, pushing past him into the house. "And I need you to be honest with me. Really honest." His father's face shifted from surprise to concern. "What's this about?" Daniel pulled out his phone and showed him the photo of Mrs. Bradford's daughter. "Who is this?" Thomas went very still. All the color drained from his face. "Where did you get that?" "Answer the question, Dad. Who is she?" "That's your mother. You know that." "Why are you asking me this?" "No," Daniel said, his voice hard. "What was her real name?" "Her full name. Her name before she married you." Thomas sat down heavily on the couch. For a long moment he said nothing. Then quietly, "Rebecca Bradford." The confirmation hit Daniel like a physical blow, even though he'd been expecting it. "So you lied to me. My entire life you lied to me." "I didn't lie," Thomas said, but his voice was weak. I didn't tell you everything. That's the same thing." Daniel's voice rose. "You let me believe her name was Jennifer. You never mentioned she had a mother, a family. There's a woman out there who's been searching for her daughter for 30 years, and you knew where she was the whole time." "It wasn't like that," Thomas said, his hands shaking. "You don't understand. Her mother she was controlling, toxic. She made Rebecca's life miserable. When we left, Rebecca wanted to start fresh. She changed her name legally. She wanted nothing to do with her old life. So after Mom died, you decided to keep that going? You didn't think her mother deserved to know?" Thomas looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. "I was going to tell her. I swear I was. But then time passed and it got harder. How do you tell someone that their daughter died years ago, and you never bothered to inform them? How do you admit that?" Daniel paced the small living room, his mind racing. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." "And no more lies." Thomas took a deep breath. "I met your mother at a coffee shop. She was 22 and I was 30. She was this bright, beautiful person full of life. We fell in love fast, maybe too fast. When she took me to meet her mother, it was a disaster. Mrs. Bradford made it clear she thought I was wrong for Rebecca. Too old, wrong background, wrong career. She tried to forbid Rebecca from seeing me. So you ran away together?" "Rebecca made the choice to leave. I supported her, but it was her decision. She was tired of being controlled, tired of having every decision questioned. She wanted to be her own person." Thomas rubbed his face. "We left in the middle of the night. Drove 3 states over. Rebecca legally changed her name to Jennifer. We got married, started a new life. And you never contacted Mrs. Bradford?" "Rebecca didn't want to. She said her mother would just try to pull her back, try to control her again. And honestly, I was fine with that. I didn't like the woman either. She'd been cruel to Rebecca, said awful things about me, about us. Why would we want her in our lives?" Daniel sat down, feeling exhausted. "What happened after I was born?" Thomas's expression softened. "You were the best thing that ever happened to us. Rebecca was an amazing mother. She was so happy. She painted again, something her mother had discouraged. She made friends, had a life. We weren't rich, but we were happy. Until the accident." "Until the accident," Thomas echoed. "You were 5. She was driving home from the grocery store. A drunk driver ran a red light. She died instantly. And his voice cracked. "I fell apart. I could barely take care of myself, let alone a 5-year-old. But you didn't tell Mrs. Bradford?" "I thought about it. I really did. I even looked up her address once. But what would I say? Your daughter has been alive all this time, but now she's dead and I never told you?" It seemed cruel, and I was ashamed. Ashamed that I'd kept her away from her daughter. Ashamed that I hadn't tried to build bridges. Ashamed that Rebecca died and her mother never got to say goodbye. Thomas's voice broke completely. "So I did nothing. And the longer I waited, the harder it became. Years passed. You grew up. I told myself you didn't need to know, that it would just hurt you. That it was better to let the past stay buried." Daniel felt anger and sympathy warring inside him. His father had made terrible choices, but he could understand the fear behind them. "Mrs. Bradford has been looking for her daughter for 30 years, Dad. 30 years of not knowing if she was alive or dead. Do you have any idea what that must have been like for her? I know, Thomas whispered. God, I know. I'm a coward. I've always been a coward. She thinks Mom might still be alive. She talks about her like she might come back any day. Thomas looked up sharply. You met her? You met Rebecca's mother? Daniel explained what had happened the night before, how he'd helped an old woman in a parking lot and ended up discovering his grandmother. As he talked, he watched his father's face cycle through emotions. Shock, fear, guilt, and something that might have been relief. What do I do? Thomas asked when Daniel finished. What can I possibly do to make this right? You tell her the truth, all of it. She deserves to know what happened to her daughter. She'll hate me. Probably, Daniel agreed, but that's not a reason to keep lying. This isn't about you anymore, Dad, it's about her. She's an old woman who's spent half her life searching for her daughter. She deserves to know the truth, even if it breaks her heart. Thomas nodded slowly. You're right. You're absolutely right. When? Soon. I need to prepare her first. She's fragile, and this news, it's going to destroy her. Over the next few days, Daniel visited Mrs. Bradford every evening. He couldn't quite bring himself to call her grandmother yet, even though that's what she was. They talked for hours. She showed him photo albums full of pictures of his mother as a baby, a child, a teenager. She told him stories about Rebecca's childhood, her dreams, her personality. Daniel learned that his mother had loved painting landscapes, especially mountains, that she'd been afraid of spiders but would catch them and release them outside rather than kill them, that she'd wanted to travel the world someday, that her favorite food had been chocolate chip pancakes with strawberries. These were things his father had never told him. In his father's version of events, Daniel's mother had appeared fully formed as an adult with no history, no family, no past. Now she was becoming real to him in a way she'd never been before. She used to sit right where you're sitting, Mrs. Bradford said one evening, pointing to the armchair Daniel had claimed as his spot. She'd curl up with a book and read for hours. I used to tell her she'd ruin her eyes. She smiled sadly. I wish I'd spent less time nagging her and more time just enjoying her company. Daniel knew he couldn't put off the truth much longer. Every day he spent with Mrs. Bradford, letting her believe her daughter might still be out there, felt like another betrayal. But how do you tell someone that the person they've been searching for has been dead for 27 years? He finally decided to be direct. There was no good way to deliver news like this. No gentle words that would soften the blow. On Friday evening, he asked his father to come with him to Mrs. Bradford's house. Thomas had aged 10 years in the last week. He'd barely eaten, barely slept. As they drove to the suburbs, he kept wringing his hands. What if she calls the police? He asked. What if she blames me for Rebecca's death? Then you deal with it, Daniel said firmly. This is your mess, Dad. You have to face it. When Mrs. Bradford opened the door and saw Thomas standing there, she knew immediately. Daniel watched her face as recognition dawned, as she looked between Thomas and Daniel and understood who this man was. You, she whispered. You're the man who took my daughter away. Mrs. Bradford, Thomas began, his voice shaking. I need to tell you something. About Rebecca. About your daughter. And I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. Mrs. Bradford steadied herself against the doorframe. Daniel could see her preparing for the worst. After 30 years of hoping, she knew what was coming. She's gone, isn't she? Mrs. Bradford said quietly. My Rebecca is dead. And as Thomas nodded, as tears began streaming down his face, Daniel watched his grandmother's world shatter. The hope she'd clung to for 3 decades died in that moment, and he'd never felt more helpless in his life. Mrs. Bradford didn't cry at first. She just stood there in the doorway, frozen, as if turning to stone. Daniel reached out to steady her, afraid she might collapse, but she pulled away from him. Her eyes were fixed on Thomas with an expression Daniel couldn't quite read. Anger? Grief? Both? Come inside, she said finally, her voice hollow. Tell me everything. They sat in her living room, the same room where Daniel had discovered the truth just a week ago. Thomas looked like he might be sick. His hands trembled as he tried to find the words to begin. Rebecca died 27 years ago, he said quietly. A car accident. It was quick. She didn't suffer. Mrs. Bradford made a sound, something between a gasp and a sob. Her hand pressed against her chest. 27 years. She's been gone for 27 years, and you never told me. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't mean anything, but I'm so sorry. How old was she? 29. Daniel had just turned 5. Mrs. Bradford looked at Daniel, then really looked at him. You were just a baby. You lost your mother when you were so young. Her voice cracked. Just like I lost mine when I was 12. Rebecca knew that. She knew how much that hurt me. And I never got to tell her goodbye. Never got to hold my daughter one last time. Daniel felt tears burning in his own eyes. He'd mourned his mother as a child, but it was an abstract grief. Mourning someone he barely remembered. Watching his grandmother process this loss fresh and raw after 3 decades of hope was unbearable. Tell me about her life, Mrs. Bradford said, looking at Thomas. After she left, was she happy? Thomas nodded, wiping his eyes. Yes, she was happy. She changed her name to Jennifer, started fresh. We got married 6 months after we left. She found work at a bookstore that she loved. She painted again. She made friends. When Daniel was born, she was the happiest I'd ever seen her. She was painting again. Mrs. Bradford's voice lifted slightly. I used to tell her she was wasting her time with art, that she needed a practical career. She covered her face with her hands. I said so many stupid things. I thought I was protecting her, but I was just pushing her away. She talked about you sometimes, Thomas said softly. Especially after Daniel was born. She'd wonder if you'd want to meet your grandson, if maybe enough time had passed. Then why didn't you bring him to me? Mrs. Bradford's anger finally broke through. After she died, why didn't you tell me? I had a grandson. A piece of Rebecca was still alive, and you kept him from me. Because I was ashamed, Thomas admitted. I'd helped Rebecca cut you out of her life. I'd supported her decision to change her name, to disappear. And when she died, I couldn't face you. Couldn't admit what I'd done. So I took the coward's way out. I stayed silent. You had no right, Mrs. Bradford said, her voice shaking. No right to make that decision for me. Rebecca was an adult. She made her own choices. But Daniel was a child. He deserved to know his family. I deserved to know my grandson. You're right. You're absolutely right. They sat in painful silence. Daniel didn't know what to say. Part of him was angry at his father for stealing these years from both of them. Part of him understood the fear and shame that had kept his father silent. And part of him was grieving for the mother he never really knew and the grandmother he'd only just met. I want to see where she's buried, Mrs. Bradford said suddenly. I want to visit my daughter's grave, Thomas nodded. Of course. I'll take you whenever you want. Now. I want to go now. It was already evening, but Daniel understood the urgency. Mrs. Bradford had been waiting 30 years. She couldn't wait another day, another hour. They drove in silence to the cemetery across town, a peaceful place with rolling hills and old oak trees. Daniel had only been here a handful of times. His father rarely visited, and Daniel had never felt much connection to the place. His memories of his mother were so faint that the grave had always seemed abstract, a marker for someone he didn't really know. But watching Mrs. Bradford approach the headstone, seeing her knees buckle as she read the name Jennifer Chen, beloved wife and mother, Daniel felt the weight of it all. This was his grandmother meeting her daughter for the first time in 30 years. The last time she'd seen Rebecca, they'd been screaming at each other. Now she was kneeling on damp grass, pressing her hand against cold stone. Rebecca, Mrs. Bradford whispered. My baby girl. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Daniel and Thomas stood back, giving her space to grieve. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. In the distance, Daniel could hear traffic, life continuing as normal. But here, time seemed to have stopped. Mrs. Bradford talked to the grave for a long time. She told Rebecca about the years of searching, the private investigators, the sleepless nights. She apologized for being too controlling, too critical, too afraid of losing her daughter that she'd pushed her away. She talked about Rebecca's father, who'd died 10 years ago, never knowing what happened to his daughter. She told Rebecca about how she'd kept her room exactly the same for years, hoping she'd come back. I found your son, she said finally. He's a good man. You'd be so proud of him. He has your kindness, your eyes. And I promise you, Rebecca, I promise I won't make the same mistakes with him that I made with you. I won't push him away. I won't try to control him. I'll just love him, the way I should have just loved you. When she finally stood up, her face was streaked with tears, but there was something different in her expression. Not peace exactly, but perhaps the beginning of acceptance. Over the next few weeks, Daniel spent more and more time with his grandmother. She showed him boxes of his mother's things that she'd saved: childhood drawings, high school papers, letters to friends. There was a whole life there that Daniel had never known about. He found his mother's paintings in the attic, just as Mrs. Bradford had said. Landscapes mostly, rendered in soft watercolors, mountains and forests and streams. They were beautiful. And looking at them, Daniel felt like he was seeing a part of his mother that his father had never shared with him. "Your father told me she stopped painting," Daniel said one afternoon as they looked through the artwork. He said her mother had discouraged it. Mrs. Bradford winced. "I did. I thought art was impractical. I wanted her to be a teacher or a nurse, something stable. I grew up poor, you see. My parents struggled. I wanted Rebecca to have security, but I went about it all wrong. Instead of supporting her dreams, I tried to crush them. No wonder she left. She did paint again, though," Daniel reminded her gently. "Dad said she was happy. She got to live her dream, at least for a while. That's something, I suppose." Mrs. Bradford touched one of the paintings, a mountain scene with snow-capped peaks. She always wanted to see the Rockies. Did she ever get to go? Daniel didn't know. He realized how much he didn't know about his mother's life. His father had told him the basic facts, but none of the details that made a person real. "I'm going to talk to Dad more about her," Daniel decided. "Get him to tell me stories. Real stories, not just the sanitized version he's been giving me all these years." Mrs. Bradford nodded. "And I'll tell you everything I remember. Between the two of us, maybe we can help you know who your mother really was." It became a routine. Every Sunday, Daniel would visit his grandmother. She'd make lunch, and they'd look through old photos or letters. She taught him how to make Rebecca's favorite chocolate chip pancakes. She told him about the time Rebecca had tried to dye her hair blonde in the bathroom and turned it orange instead. About how Rebecca had been terrified of thunderstorms until she was 10. About her first crush, her first heartbreak, her dreams of traveling the world. Slowly, his mother became real to him. Not the perfect saintly figure his father had painted, but an actual person. Flawed, complicated, human. A woman who'd made mistakes, who'd been stubborn and passionate and creative and scared. One Sunday, Mrs. Bradford pulled out a small wooden box Daniel had never seen before. "I want to give you something," she said. "I was going to wait, but I think now is the right time." Inside the box was a silver locket on a delicate chain. Mrs. Bradford opened it to reveal 2 tiny photographs inside. One was of her and her late husband on their wedding day. The other was of Rebecca as a baby. "This was Rebecca's," Mrs. Bradford explained. "I gave it to her on her 16th birthday. She left it behind when she ran away. I think she'd want you to have it now." Daniel held the locket carefully, feeling the weight of it in his palm. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. You're her son. You should have something that was hers." Mrs. Bradford paused, then added, "You could put a picture of your own family in there someday. Keep the connection going." Daniel thought about his girlfriend, about the future they were planning, about maybe having kids of his own someday. The idea of passing this locket down, of keeping his mother's memory alive through generations, felt right. "Thank you," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything. For sharing her with me." "Thank you for finding me," Mrs. Bradford replied. "I spent 30 years searching for Rebecca. I never thought I'd find her, but I found you instead, and that's more than I ever hoped for." But there was still tension between Mrs. Bradford and Thomas. Whenever they were in the same room, the air felt heavy with unspoken words. Mrs. Bradford was polite but cold. Thomas was apologetic but defensive. Daniel knew they needed to talk, really talk, but he didn't know how to make that happen. The opportunity came unexpectedly. Daniel's girlfriend organized a birthday dinner for him, and he invited both his father and grandmother. It was awkward at first, everyone tiptoeing around each other. But as the evening went on, something shifted. Mrs. Bradford started asking Thomas about Rebecca's life after she left. Not accusingly, but genuinely wanting to know. Thomas, perhaps feeling the weight of his guilt lifting slightly, opened up. He told stories Daniel had never heard. About the time Rebecca had tried to teach him to paint and he'd been hopeless at it. About how she'd sing in the shower, always off-key. About the way she'd scrunch up her nose when she was concentrating. She used to do that as a child, Mrs. Bradford said, her eyes distant with memory, especially when she was drawing. I'd watch her for hours, just sitting there with her tongue sticking out slightly, completely absorbed in her work. She did the same thing when she was painting, Thomas said, and for the first time he smiled when talking about Rebecca. She'd get so focused she'd forget to eat. I'd have to remind her. They talked late into the night, trading stories, filling in gaps in each other's knowledge. Daniel listened, learning more about his mother in those few hours than he had in his entire life. She became fully dimensional to him, a complete person rather than just a photograph and a vague memory. As the evening wound down, Mrs. Bradford turned to Thomas. "I've been angry with you," she said carefully, "and I have every right to be. But sitting here, listening to you talk about her, I can see that you loved her, really loved her, and she loved you." "She did," Thomas said quietly, "more than I deserved. Maybe we both made mistakes," Mrs. Bradford continued. "I pushed too hard. You kept her away. And Rebecca. She made her own choices, too. She chose to leave. She chose to change her name. We can't put all the blame on each other. I should have contacted you after she died," Thomas insisted. "That was my choice, and it was wrong. I robbed you of years with your grandson. I can't make that right." "No, you can't," Mrs. Bradford agreed. "But you can make sure it doesn't continue. We can't change the past, but we can choose how we move forward." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. 3 months after that dinner, Daniel was sitting in Mrs. Bradford's living room when she brought out a photo album he'd never seen before. It was older than the others, the cover worn and faded. "I've been thinking," she said slowly, settling into her chair, "about whether to show you this. But you deserve to know the whole truth, not just the good parts." Daniel felt a prickle of unease. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Bradford opened the album. The first few pages showed typical family photos, birthday parties, holidays, school pictures. But then she stopped at a page that had several photos removed, leaving only the corner pieces where they'd been mounted. "I took these out years ago," she explained, "after Rebecca left. I was so angry I couldn't stand to look at them. But I saved them, put them in a box in the attic." She pulled out an envelope and handed it to Daniel. "These are from the year before Rebecca left. Look carefully." Daniel opened the envelope and spread the photos on the coffee table. They showed Rebecca at various family gatherings. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but as he looked closer, he started to notice things. In one photo, Rebecca was wearing long sleeves despite it being clearly summer. In another, her smile didn't reach her eyes. In a third, there was what looked like a bruise on her arm, partially hidden by her sleeve. "I don't understand," Daniel said, though a cold feeling was spreading through his chest. Mrs. Bradford took a shaky breath. "The truth is, my relationship with Rebecca was complicated. I loved her more than anything in this world, but I had problems. I was controlling, yes, but it was worse than that. I was angry a lot. My husband, he traveled for work, and I was alone with Rebecca most of the time, and I took my frustrations out on her." Daniel's mouth went dry. "What are you saying?" "I never hit her," Mrs. Bradford said quickly. "Never physically. But I was cruel. I'd say terrible things when I was angry. I'd tell her she was ungrateful, that she'd never amount to anything, that she was wasting her life. I'd give her the silent treatment for days. I'd criticize everything she did. Tears were streaming down her face. And sometimes when I was really angry, I'd break her things. Her paintings, her art supplies. I destroyed a portfolio she was working on once right in front of her. Just ripped it to pieces." Daniel felt sick. This wasn't the grandmother he'd come to know. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need to know that when Rebecca left, it wasn't just about your father. It wasn't just about me being overprotective or disapproving. She was running away from years of emotional abuse, and I need you to understand that so you can understand your father better." "What does Dad have to do with this?" Mrs. Bradford closed her eyes. "When your father told me I was controlling and toxic, he wasn't lying. I was. Rebecca needed to get away from me. And your father, he helped her do that. He gave her an escape. At the time, I blamed him for taking my daughter away. But the truth is, Rebecca chose to leave, and she had good reasons." Daniel didn't know what to say. He'd spent the last 3 months building a relationship with his grandmother, learning to love her. Now she was telling him she'd been abusive to his mother. "I've spent 30 years in therapy," Mrs. Bradford continued, "working on my anger, my control issues, my trauma. My mother was the same way with me, you see. It's a pattern, a cycle, and I passed it on to Rebecca. That's my greatest shame. Not that I lost her, but that I hurt her in the first place, that I made her childhood painful when it should have been happy." "Does Dad know about this?" "I think he suspected. Rebecca probably told him some of it. That's why he was so protective of her, why he supported her decision to cut contact completely. He was protecting her from me. Daniel stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the world continued as normal. Cars drove by, a neighbor mowed their lawn, kids played in a yard across the street. But inside this house, everything he thought he understood was shifting again. "Why did you lie to me?" he asked, not turning around. "All these months you let me think you were just an overprotective mother. You let me blame Dad for keeping us apart. Because I was ashamed. And because I was afraid you'd hate me if you knew the truth. That you'd leave just like Rebecca did." Her voice broke. "And I couldn't bear to lose you too. You're all I have left of her." Daniel turned around. His grandmother looked small and old and broken. "Did you really change? Or are you just good at hiding it?" "I changed," she said firmly. "It took years and it's still work every day. But I'm not that person anymore. I swear to you, Daniel, I would never hurt you the way I hurt her." He wanted to believe her, but trust once broken was hard to rebuild. "I need time to process this. I understand." "Take all the time you need." Daniel left without saying goodbye. He drove straight to his father's house, his mind churning. When Thomas answered the door, Daniel pushed past him into the living room. "You knew," Daniel said. "You knew what she was like and you didn't tell me." Thomas closed the door slowly. "So she told you. Why didn't you warn me? I've been spending all this time with her, building a relationship, and you just let me?" "Because she's not that person anymore," Thomas said. "I've seen her with you. She's different. She's worked on herself. And she's your grandmother. You deserve the chance to know her. That should have been my choice to make." "You're right. I'm sorry. I should have told you." Thomas sat down heavily. "But honestly, I was afraid you'd refuse to see her. And despite everything, despite what she did to Rebecca, I knew Rebecca would have wanted you to have a relationship with her mother if it was possible." "How do you know that?" "Because Rebecca talked about her sometimes, especially toward the end. She wondered if her mother had changed, if maybe enough time had passed that they could try again. She never got the chance to find out, but I think she would have wanted to know if forgiveness was possible." Daniel sank onto the couch. "I don't know what to think anymore about any of this. Think about the person Mrs. Bradford is now, not just who she was 30 years ago. People can change. Not always, but sometimes. She's been in therapy for decades. She's acknowledged what she did wrong. She's trying to be better. Isn't that what we should want? For people to recognize their mistakes and grow from them? It's not that simple. No, it's not. But life rarely is." Thomas sat down next to his son. "I've made my own terrible mistakes. I kept you from your grandmother out of shame and fear. I let her suffer for 27 years not knowing what happened to her daughter. I'm not exactly in a position to judge her for her past." They sat in silence for a while. Finally, Daniel asked, "Did Mom forgive her? Before she died, did she talk about forgiving her mother?" Thomas considered this carefully. "I think she was on her way there. She'd started saying things like maybe her mother had been dealing with her own trauma. Maybe she'd done the best she could with what she had. Rebecca was beginning to understand that hurt people, and that didn't excuse it, but it explained it. I think if she'd lived, she might have reached out eventually. Tried to rebuild the relationship. What do you think I should do?" "I think you should do whatever feels right for you. If you need space from Mrs. Bradford, take it. If you want to cut contact completely, do that. But if you decide to give her a chance, go into it with your eyes open. Know what she's capable of, watch for warning signs, but also recognize that she's trying to be better." Over the next week, Daniel avoided both his father and his grandmother. He needed time to sort through his feelings without their input. His girlfriend listened as he processed everything, offering support but not advice. "The thing is," Daniel said one night as they lay in bed, "I actually like her. Mrs. Bradford, I mean. The person she is now. She's kind and funny and she loves me. I can feel that. But knowing what she did to my mom, how do I reconcile those two things?" "Maybe you don't have to," his girlfriend suggested. "Maybe you can acknowledge both things are true. That she was an abusive mother, and that she's a good grandmother. That she hurt your mom and that she's sorry for it. People are complicated. They can be multiple things at once, but what if she hurts me? What if the old her comes back? Then you leave. You set boundaries. You protect yourself. But you can't live your whole life afraid of what might happen. You have to decide if the relationship is worth the risk." Daniel thought about that for a long time. Was it worth the risk? He'd lived 31 years without knowing his grandmother. He could go back to that. Forget he'd ever met her. Forget the last 3 months had happened. It would be easier, simpler, safer, but he'd also miss her. Miss the Sunday lunches and the stories about his mother. Miss the way she'd light up when he walked in the door. Miss having that connection to his past, to his mother's history. Finally, he called Mrs. Bradford and asked if he could come over. When he arrived, she looked nervous, like she expected him to say goodbye forever. "I've been thinking," Daniel started, sitting in what had become his usual chair, "about what you told me, about the past. I understand if you don't want to see me anymore," Mrs. Bradford said quickly. "I wouldn't blame you. What I did to your mother was unforgivable. Was it, though? Unforgivable?" Daniel leaned forward. "Because Mom was thinking about forgiving you. Dad told me. Before she died, she was starting to think about reaching out, trying to rebuild the relationship. If she could consider forgiving you, maybe I can too." Mrs. Bradford's eyes widened. She was. Yeah. She was starting to understand that you were dealing with your own pain, your own trauma. That doesn't excuse what you did, but it explains it. And you've spent 30 years working on yourself, trying to be better. That has to count for something. I don't deserve your forgiveness, maybe not. But I'm not giving it to you because you deserve it. I'm giving it to you because I want to. Because I want to have a grandmother. Because I think Mom would want us to have a relationship. And because I believe people can change." Mrs. Bradford was crying now, silent tears streaming down her face. "Thank you. Thank you so much. But," Daniel added firmly, "this comes with conditions. If I ever see signs of that old behavior, if you ever try to control me or hurt me the way you hurt Mom, I'm gone. No second chances. Understood? Understood? I promise you, Daniel, I will never be that person with you. I've worked too hard to go back to that. Okay then. We'll try this. Slowly. Carefully. But we'll try." They talked for hours that day. Mrs. Bradford told him more about her own childhood, about the abuse she'd suffered from her own mother. She explained how she'd never learned healthy ways to express anger or frustration, how she'd repeated the patterns she'd grown up with. She talked about the years of therapy, the hard work of breaking those patterns, the daily effort to be better. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't easy, but it was honest. And Daniel appreciated that more than anything else. No more secrets, no more lies, no more pretending the past didn't exist. When he left that evening, Mrs. Bradford hugged him tightly. "Your mother would be proud of you," she whispered. "You're a better person than I ever was." "You're doing pretty good now," Daniel replied. "Let's focus on that." The next Sunday, Daniel brought his girlfriend to lunch at Mrs. Bradford's house. The Sunday after that, his father joined them. It was awkward, all of them together, carrying the weight of their shared history, but it was also healing. They were trying. They were choosing connection over comfort, forgiveness over anger, hope over fear. And slowly, carefully, they were becoming something like a family. 6 months after discovering his grandmother, Daniel stood in her attic surrounded by boxes. Mrs. Bradford had asked for his help organizing 30 years of accumulated memories, and he'd agreed, curious about what other secrets might be hidden up here. "Most of this is junk," Mrs. Bradford called from downstairs. "Just throw out anything that looks like trash. I've been meaning to clean this out for years." Daniel opened the first box and found old tax returns from the 90s. The second box held Christmas decorations. The third box, though, made him pause. It was full of letters, dozens of them, still in their envelopes, all addressed to Mrs. Dorothy Bradford, all returned stamped address unknown or return to sender. He brought the box downstairs. "What are these?" Mrs. Bradford's face fell when she saw them. "Oh, those. I'd forgotten about those." She took one of the letters, turning it over in her hands. "After Rebecca left, I wrote to her. Every week for the first 5 years. I didn't have an address, so I sent them to friends she'd had, old co-workers, anywhere I thought she might be. They all came back, but I kept writing anyway. It made me feel like I was still talking to her, even if she never read them." "Can I read one?" Mrs. Bradford hesitated, then nodded. "Go ahead. I've got nothing left to hide." Daniel opened a letter dated 3 years after his mother left. The handwriting was shaky, emotional. "Dear Rebecca," it began, "it's been 1,095 days since you left. I count every one. Today would have been your 25th birthday. I made your favorite cake and sat alone in the kitchen, wishing you were here to blow out the candles. I'm writing to apologize again, though I know you'll probably never read this. I was wrong about so many things. Wrong about how I treated you, wrong about your dreams, wrong about that man. All I wanted was to protect you, but I ended up driving you away instead. I've started seeing a therapist. She says I have control issues stemming from my own childhood. I'm trying to work on it, but it's hard to change patterns that are decades old. I hope wherever you are, you're happy. I hope you're painting. I hope you've forgiven me, even if you never want to see me again. I love you. I've always loved you, even when I was too angry to show it properly. Your mother. Daniel felt his throat tighten. He picked up another letter, this one from 7 years later. Dear Rebecca, I saw a woman today who looked like you. Same hair, same way of walking. I followed her for 3 blocks before I realized it wasn't you. I felt like a fool, but I can't help it. I see you everywhere. In the grocery store, at the park, on the news. Every young woman with dark hair makes my heart stop for a moment. Your father's getting worse. The doctors say it's his heart. He asks about you every day. He wants to see you before he dies. I tell him you'll come home soon, even though I know you won't. I don't have the heart to tell him the truth, that you're never coming back, and it's my fault. I'm working on myself. Still in therapy. I volunteer at a women's shelter now, helping mothers learn better parenting skills. It helps to feel like maybe I can prevent other families from falling apart the way ours did. I think about you every day. Every single day. With love, your mother. She mentioned Dad's father, Daniel said. He died 10 years ago. Mrs. Bradford nodded, without ever knowing what happened to Rebecca. He held out hope until the very end, kept her picture on his nightstand. His last words were her name. Daniel set down the letters, feeling overwhelmed. This is so sad. Yes, it is. But it's also the truth. This is what happens when families break apart. Everyone suffers. Not just the person who leaves, but everyone left behind. They spent the rest of the afternoon going through the attic. Daniel found his mother's old report cards showing straight A's in art classes. He found a diary from when she was 16, full of teenage angst and dreams of escaping to somewhere she could be herself. He found a box of art supplies, expensive ones that had never been opened. I bought those for her 29th birthday, Mrs. Bradford explained. I was going to mail them to her if I ever found her. I never did, obviously. Never got the chance to give them to her. Daniel thought about his mother dying at 29 in a car accident. She'd been so young. Too young. Do you think she was happy? In those years after she left? Your father says she was. And I believe him. She got to paint, she got to be free, she had you. That's more than I gave her when she lived here. So yes, I think she was happy. I just wish I could have been part of that happiness. As they carried boxes down from the attic, Daniel made a decision. I want to do something for Mom. Something to honor her memory. I've been thinking about it for a while, and I think I know what it should be. What's that? An art scholarship. For young artists who need help getting started. We could call it the Rebecca Bradford Memorial Scholarship. Help other kids pursue their dreams the way Mom wanted to pursue hers. Mrs. Bradford's eyes filled with tears. She'd love that. She really would. Over the next few months, Daniel and Mrs. Bradford worked together to set up the scholarship fund. They used some of Mrs. Bradford's savings and money Daniel had been setting aside for a house down payment. They contacted local high schools and art programs, setting up the criteria. The scholarship would go to a graduating senior pursuing art, particularly students from difficult home situations who needed support. Thomas contributed too, both money and his time. He helped with the paperwork and the legal setup. It was the first project the 3 of them had worked on together, and despite the occasional awkwardness, it felt right. The first scholarship was awarded in May, 8 months after Daniel had met his grandmother.